I suppose I wanted to keep with the theming for this week. It feels like we've been talking about strategy and vision and about things that you see. So I thought I'd give you a list of what someone branded the top 5 deadly strategy myths. So these are the deadliest strategy myths that you can encounter. So when you reflect on the question long and hard, and have concluded that 5 strategy myths are the only ones or the deadliest, these tend to diminish the effectiveness and value in strategy and damage the companies that they fall upon. If you try to order these from most damaging to least damaging, it's hard. It's hard to make the case that one is deadlier than the next. They're all just really bad. So I thought it would be a good idea just to kind of list these off and talk openly about them and see where we go. And so in no particular order, here are 5 of the deadliest myths. Number 1, a list of initiatives equals a strategy. This is a near universal myth, right up there with historical greats like the earth is flat, or the stars and planets rotate around the earth, or lead pipes are great for carrying water. Cigarettes don't cause cancer. Journalists always report objectively. I think you get where this is going, right? Because of this myth, a list of initiatives is the dominant form of strategy found on the planet. No other manifestation of strategy comes close in usage. So empirically, a list of initiatives is a strategy, right? But in truth, it's not. A list of initiatives is the output of a process that we like to refer to called planning. You may have heard of that before. It's one of these things where when people plan, and I heard someone say this at an Agile conference not too long ago. Someone says if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. And I thought to myself, I said, that's a good way to look at it. But at the same time, if you overplan, you're going to drown. So how do you get to the point where you're like, okay, I get it and I know what I need to do without overdoing it? Does that make sense? How do you get that balance? So a fatal shortcoming with a list of initiatives is that it's usually focused on things that you control and not on the one terribly important thing that you can't control, and that's your customers. And that's the tricky part, right? That's the hard thing. If you try to make up a list of things you can control and control all those things, that's so easy, right? Anyone can do that. But deciding to invest in a set of activities that compels the customers to think more like you want them to think, to act as you wish, that's the hard part, and that's the part that's exceedingly valuable. In the world of strategy, people make the easy versus hard choice quickly and seamlessly because they believe the myth that they are doing strategy and that strategy is making them successful, when in actuality, strategy is a lost art, and many people just make lists, are making lists to fail. All right, let's go on to the second one. You can prove that your strategy is correct. In strategy, there's a dominant and highly bureaucratic belief that if you're rigorous enough with your analysis, you can prove in advance that your strategy is correct. That leads to not doing anything new or different unless you can prove it is correct first and certain it'll work. Since nobody on the planet can ever, even in the best circumstance, prove anything about the future that involves humans interacting in markets with each other or within companies, companies are going to steer away from doing anything that deviates from the status quo. That's because the status quo has an implicit exemption. Since we aren't dead, our strategy must be more correct than any alternative, but which we have no proof of is correct, which is weird. The logic is obviously stupid on its face, but it is the dominant logic that's powered by the associated myth. So this myth also inspires other related myths, such as the myth that it's useful to spend time and effort on forecasting revenue. Forecasting the future behavior of something over which you have zero control, with whom customers spend their money, is a silly waste of time. It isn't terribly damaging. It isn't like giving a crying child a pacifier. It makes the child feel better without providing anything of true value, like affection or food or love. At least it doesn't damage the child, though pediatricians may say otherwise. So I'm not a pediatrician, but you get where I'm going with this, right? It's the temporary, oh, here's a fix. And that while it's great for short term, I don't know that it's going to give us the long term what we're looking for. All right, the next myth. Analytically strong people are better strategists. Readers may be surprised that this one is on the list, or that we're even talking about it, right? So it's a bad thing. And let me explain what I mean by that. The view that strategists are analytical wizards, and it's just, you have to think about it this way here. So there was a book or a movie, both, called The Right Stuff. Do you remember that space movie? So the author, I believe, was Tom Wolfe, and it was about the early days of the U.S. space program. The star character of the book was Chuck Yeager, and he was considered by most in the field to be the greatest test pilot who ever lived. Famously, he was the pilot who broke the sound barrier, but didn't want to become an astronaut because that would force him to become spam in a can. Since he was the alpha pilot, every pilot wanted to be like him, and that's why pilots today, a half century after Yeager's retirement, still mimic his folksy, all-shucks drawl when they talk to passengers on the intercom. If you've ever been on a flight before, you know what I'm talking about. This is Delta 584. That drawl, that's where it came from. In strategy, the first true Delta. Here I go. I'm thinking about Delta again. The first true strategist was Boston Consulting Group. Their founder, Bruce Henderson, he was one of the first strategists. And he built his firm with analytical wonderkind, originally mainly Baker scholars from Harvard Business School. They graphed experience curves and analyzed growth rates and market share to place business on growth share matrices. And so it was with Yeager, everyone wanted to be like Henderson and his earlier acolytes. And because all the early strategists were analytically obsessed, the assumption became that the analytical people would be better strategists. I know this because I've seen it over and over again. Showing analytical prowess and orientation was the only successful route through which through process for anyone who thought that they could do this. And despite the nearly universal assumption that a better analyst would be a better strategist, there has never been any demonstration that there's a validity to the view. Analysts hire analysts in several referential get-togethers, right? It's just you always have analysts who want to analyze other analysts, and it just goes on and on, right? This problem is the greatest the bigger problem, the overarching problem. The overarching problem is that the greatest strategists in business history, we could be talking about Steve Jobs or Fred Smith, imagine a future that does not now exist and therefore can't be analyzed. And they go on to create it. Rather than depend on analysis, they refuse to be constrained by it. The best strategists realize that their analytical prowess is a shortcoming to be overcome. That makes a lot of sense. The key to being a great strategist is using your imagination, not your analysis. This gets back to advice from my favorite philosopher, Aristotle. Imagine possibilities and choose the one for which the most compelling argument can be made. If you haven't listened to the Aristotle podcast, you need to do it. Go ahead and Google it. Aristotle was the OG Agilist, right? Okay. Strategy is a zero-sum game. It's the next one. Some commentators don't like strategy because they see it as being about winners beating losers in a destructive zero-sum game. It seems to be aggressive, undignified, and negative, with callous regarding the fate of the workers of the crushed competitor. That is strategy at its worst. That's when it's least effective. Military gurus from Sun Tzu to Karl von Clausewitz argue against this conception of competition. Strategy should always seek to produce a positive sum game in which your company succeeds in a particular place, where to play in a particular way, how to win, that convinces others to succeed in different places and in different ways. Will this competitive overlap be zero? Rarely, but a lower overlap will cause customers to be satisfied in more ways. More companies will prosper through serving their targeted customers better. Strategy should make the world a better place, not just rearrange who benefits. So the zero-sum approach easily falls into that category. Replicating competitors requires no imagination or creativity. That's why the myth of strategy as automatically being zero-sum game is so damaging. It encourages managers to do the very easiest thing, the very least, and the one with the worst result for companies, customers, employees, and their communities in which they work is that route. Okay, let's hit the last one. Strategy is formulated at the top and then executed below. Perhaps the most nefarious myth is that senior leadership formulates strategy and that everyone else just executes according to that strategy. There's so many examples where this can't be true. Now, should you have a North Star or a strategy of which direction you're trying to go? You bet. Because you want to make sure that you have eliminated uncertainty or that you understand your competition and constraints. But you also need to make sure that you're not choosing the path of uncertainty or choosing the path to mimic your competition. If something looks like a duck and it swims like a duck and it quacks like a duck, chances are it's a duck. So if you try to execute and do strategy from the very top, what you're going to see is exactly what you think you're going to run into. I call it crappy strategy, right? And when you go through all the analytical exercises that generate a list of initiatives and blame the crappiness on execution, it was my great strategy that was poorly executed. How many times have you heard that? If you are going through life thinking that way, you are insulting yourself, you're insulting your workers, and you're insulting the organization. The key here is if you're going to overcome these myths, you need to be reflective, you need to understand, you need to be creative, you need to think outside the box, and you need to make sure that you're not falling into any of these traps. Because if you can avoid the Admiral Akbar, it's a trap thing, you're going to be doing a whole lot better at work. That's going to do it for this one. It was a longer episode. If you have a topic you want us to discuss, learn more at AgileDad.com. We would love to hear from you. As always, we encourage you to stay healthy, stay well, stay agile, and get rid of these myths. Until next time, do take care.